there gets to be a kind of a momentum to these things. But of course my camera will only hold so much memory, so this is probably the second one. I might have to take a break between. But I'm telling the story of the early days of scleroderma and the introduction to the way that I kind of handled things in those days. So after this lightning experience, I really did feel very empowered. I wrote a contract to myself that I signed every day that essentially said that I was going to live. Mind you, I wasn't crazy about the idea of living if I was going to be in that much pain. However, I did come up with a way to kill myself flawlessly, which was good. And once I had that, I felt much more comfortable. I felt much more in control. And as I've spoken earlier about my shamanic journeys, that I had met a teacher along the way, and the shamanic journeys had a place in my everyday life. And I would often get in the bathtub and fill the tub with water, because then it didn't hurt so much. It just, no pressure on anything. And I would journey in the bathtub, and fabulous things would happen. I know one time I was visited by a golden bear that came to see me, and I would just drift away. So between the dreams and the journeys, I spent a lot of time in alternate realities, really, in other dimensions of being, with my consciousness, I guess, outside of my body, and paying attention to these dreams that I had. And I believe I discussed the one dream in which I was taken to a hospital, in which my father, in fact, took me to a hospital, and we saw women receiving a strange treatment in the hospital. And not long after that, I heard about an experimental program, and it was in a hospital, and it turned out that there were similarities between the dream and the treatment that was being provided in the hospital. And so at that point I knew. And the main reason I'm telling this story about the way that I approached these things was right along with the scleroderma. I knew things that had to be done. I knew, for instance, when the doctors offered me depenicillamine to take because it was the only medication that would work, that I wasn't going to take it. I knew my body didn't want it. I didn't want it. I didn't care if it was the only medication that would work, because all it did was work to allay the disease. It didn't cure it, and the side effects were terrible. It wasn't much to weigh, and I didn't weigh it intellectually. It was just like, nope, not doing this. And I stuck with that because I knew. And there's a huge difference between knowing and thinking about something. And I guess that's the main reason for my wanting to talk about this. It's trusting that knowing, because it's the knowing that is in itself interdimensional. The body exists in the now moment constantly. The mind does not. The mind wanders off to ifs and could-bes and things like that. The body doesn't do that. And it is the body that knows, not the mind. The mind reasons, but it doesn't know. It can't. It's ever changing, and quickly changing, rapidly. The body doesn't change that fast. It processes slowly. And that's where the good information is, in the body. And so in scleroderma, I followed my body's lead right along. When things felt right, I followed them. When they didn't feel right, I didn't. No matter what anybody said, I didn't. And so, ultimately, I feel that that's a big part of what saved my life, because I was following my body's wisdom, this body that exists to exist. It's the only reason. I mean, people talk about having a reason to live. The body doesn't need a reason to live. It's alive. It's not complicated. And it's got good information. And ultimately, that's where sleep magic came from, although it didn't come for, 15 years after I was cured. I had, I guess, things to learn, things to do, trips to take. I had to create my space as myself. I had to create myself as a space where things could come through clearly, plainly, and not be complicated by my mind. When you're in a massive amount of pain, it almost forces you to go into another state of consciousness. When you're not, when you're just up walking about and everything's fine and regular and normal, it's a little more difficult to turn off the mind. Now, for writers and artists, they actually have access to that state more frequently than some people. Musicians, too, I would imagine. Because you enter a kind of a trance-like state to create. You allow things to flow through you. And so very, very, very creative people have a leg up on this stuff if they want it. And I confess to being a very creative person. So perhaps I had that advantage. The ultimate advantage, of course, was that I finally was able to create myself as a space where I could open to the core of the information that wanted to come through me about sleep magic, so that it could help me help other people, since I was very, very frustrated in my healing profession with that. I knew something I didn't know, and I had to let that come up. We make it hard for ourselves, and we can't help that. We're trained from the start to think. Oh, did you think about that before you did it? I just did it. You should have thought. Well, maybe. But the whole thinking thing and the insistence on it to the detriment of anything else deprives you of your real, very real intuition, which is the learning that's inside you. And yes, some people have a good intuition and a better intuition than whatever, but most walking human beings at any rate don't have the same kind of intuition that, shall we say, a cat does. It's all they have. It's all they have. So it functions more purely, more cleanly. So any help that we can get with having access to what our body knows is going to be helpful right along the line. One of my favorite sayings of my own is that there's always better to get. And what I hope by talking about all this stuff, and perhaps most especially by promoting sleep magic as much as I do, is to help everybody get better than they are already. Because everybody's good. Thanks for listening. Thanks for being there. Love you.